I am neither an expert nor an authority on suffering, and neither would I wish to be. I'm simply a guy who makes YouTube videos in which I present, defend, and advocate antinatalism. If antinatalism arguments were so easy to dismantle, then you would focus on these actual arguments themselves, rather than try to draw attention to the antinatalists who make the arguments. If 2 plus 2 doesn't equal 4, then demonstrate why this is the case, using logic and reason, rather than pour scorn on the people who utter their truth claims. Of course, being an expert on suffering or having a position of authority do not guarantee that somebody's truth claims are congruent with reality. Therefore, the fact that I am not an expert or authority on suffering cannot be proffered as a legitimate counter-argument towards the arguments I make. Again, I do not covet authority. I am simply a collocation of atoms that manifests sentience and self-reflexivity who is rather partial to some highbrow philosophical debate. I am not seeking to decide anything. I present and defend my arguments on my YouTube channel and encourage my detractors to attempt to undermine my arguments through the employment of well-reasoned, rational, and well-informed argumentation. Quite frankly, your video was a tremendous disappointment to me in this regard. Due to the process by which our brains evolved, to wit, evolution by natural selection, our experiences of life ought not to be overly relied upon when making value judgments concerning the human condition. That is why I make extensive use of my ability to apply inductive logical reasoning to the phenomenon of sentience in order to arrive at the unsettling and disturbing conclusion that sentience creates unnecessary suffering for every single organism that possesses this capability. From this conclusion, it is a very small hop to make to become somebody who wishes to encourage others to critically evaluate the merit or demerit of procreation. I would argue that anyone who thinks that somebody can be benefited by being brought into existence is under a serious misapprehension. As you cannot deprive somebody of the goods in life if you do not create them, any discourse which spins a narrative, such as the gift of life or some other life-affirming notion, relies upon thinking that is both deluded and irrational in nature, or alternatively, just plain insincere. As for intelligence, Albert Einstein and Isaac Newton were both clearly geniuses, yet neither of them, to the best of my knowledge, were antinatalists. Perhaps we could put any perceived or imaginary slights to the side and actually focus on some argumentation. But unfortunately, that appears to be the last thing you wish to do here. Your video appears to be nothing more than a well-crafted monologue designed to incite feelings of indignation and hatred towards those who are willing to coherently argue that human civilizations are primarily built upon a steaming pile of lies. I do not wish my arguments to just be simply accepted on blind faith. I present my arguments clearly and concisely for people to grapple with. Disagreement is perfectly welcome as long as my detractors provide argumentation for why my arguments are grievously flawed and irrevocably flawed. This is why your video here is not at all welcome, and why I seek to ram home the fact that your video is utterly bereft of anything other than empty rhetoric. Come now, what is this? You wish to devolve a debate about the wisdom of perpetuating our species into a petty competition about who has experienced more suffering, the antinatalist or their detractor? What should it matter? And how could we ever resolve such a superfluous debate? Besides, the game is still in motion. Perhaps we could defer this conversation until we both lie on our deathbeds. Only then would we both be able to speak in a truly informed manner about the entirety of our subjective experiences as a rotting and decaying piece of meat. Whether someone is a hypocrite or not has no bearing on the validity of the ethical claims they make. A rapist may argue that rape is unethical, a thief may argue that stealing is unjust, and a sadist may advocate for the abolition of animal cruelty, but the cause may still remain a deserving one. One thing that claiming the person you are debating with is a hypocrite can do, however, is evoke feelings of contempt and disgust towards those who disagree with you, and by proxy their position they are arguing for. It is not difficult to see how our species' distaste for hypocrisy evolved. If I tell you not to sleep with my wife, but am quite willing to sleep unbeknownst to you with yours, then that could quite easily confer an evolutionary advantage to my DNA. However, the employment of appeals to hypocrisy should have no bearing on a philosophical discussion if the primary goal is to seek truth. You seem to be suffering from a wounded ego, SB, but I assure you there's no need. I've watched several of your videos and you strike me as somebody with decidedly superior intelligence and a well-polished delivery style in your videos. I'm quite welcome to welcome critical friends. I actively encourage it. If you want to be a critical friend, then give me some argumentation instead of this nonsense video that you made here. Oh, SB, you appear to be able to walk the walk, but you don't appear to be able to talk the talk. If antinatalism has holes in it, please elucidate what they are and elaborate on those holes. And what, pray tell, is an absolute truth? Could you perhaps mean something that is necessarily true due to logical constraints governing what is and what is not possible? I would argue that it is impossible for deprivation or suffering to be experienced if there is no sentient being to do the experiencing. I regard this as an absolute truth in the same way that I would argue that there is no such conceivable or actual thing as a square-shaped triangle. But let us, for the sake of argumentation, take a step back and agree that absolute truths are, in principle, utterly inaccessible to the human mind. Why then should it be the antinatalists who have the burden of providing absolute truths rather than those who would seed the future with their suffering and dying offspring? Absolutely. Intelligent and compassionate people creating more people by configuring energy and matter into new life forms by rubbing their sexual organs against one another, whilst bewitched by the delusion that they are actually doing the life forms they create a favor, does strike me as surreal ridiculousness. Unfortunately, I know it is actually happening in reality, or do I need to provide an absolute truth in order to support that contention as well? I take issue with your usage of the term concede here. If all it took were a 10-minute speech to cause hundreds of people to adopt an antinatalist philosophy, then the whole theory of evolution by natural selection would be placed in great jeopardy. Homo sapiens are merely one of the latest manifestations of life the drift of DNA has mutated into, and as a result of this, the majority of its individual members exhibit thought processes that are congruent with DNA's raison d'etre, survival and reproduction. After approximately 3.5 billion years of evolution, DNA has created sentient self-reflexive beings who, by and large, are unable to bring their full intellect to bear on issues pertaining to life, death, existence, and non-existence of sentience. This does not mean they are necessarily unintelligent. It just means that, like the eagle's sharp eyesight, the human brain is by and large well suited to facilitate the indefinite perpetuation of its kind. Very well then, let them breed, for there is no way to stop them from doing so. After all, I do not seek to decide anything for anybody, despite your protestations. However, as long as I believe that there are people out there who are and who could become receptive to antinatalism, I will continue to make my videos, and you are as powerless to stop me from doing so as I am powerless to physically restrain somebody from creating more human life. As for being selfish, everybody, by definition, is. Even those who display great depths of compassion for others do so because of needs that originate within the psyche of the person who cares for others. Richard Dawkins' labeling of DNA as the selfish gene was not at all unentirely fitting. And a brief comment on the word monster. Give me a break. Labeling someone a monster is an entirely subjective call to make, and cannot be inferred through the exercise of logic alone. Whether someone is delusional or irrational, however, can, which is why I use these adjectives liberally when debating against those who would disagree with my truth claim that if not sentience, then not deprivation and not suffering. The target demographic, as I see it, is the entire human race, systematically and unfairly discriminated against for millennia. Pessimistic philosophy has barely had its voice heard above the deafening cacophony of DNA-worshipping narratives, pushed to the outer rims by societies that cannot even bear their most cherished dogmas concerning human life to be questioned. There are currently very few avenues for free self-expression concerning the ethical desirability of creating more of us who will needlessly suffer and die, often for something as utterly trivial as the desire to buy baby clothes for new fodder for DNA. YouTube is one such place where this taboo is slowly but surely being gently eroded away, and in the future, more intelligent and informed antinatalists than I can address such issues as specific target demographics.